Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for March 26th, 2018. On today's show, we're going to be keeping it simple, just talking about the latest film news. This is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson, and joining me today is Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman,
Hey, that's me.
and writers Hoai-Tran
Hey everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
All right, so welcome, guys. Thank you all for joining me on this episode. So let's just jump right into the news and start off with some Captain Marvel discussion. Brad, Captain Marvel is now officially filming. I know that they've been filming for a little while, but Disney released a press release that said that they're officially filming, and there's some interesting casting news that came along with that. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so Captain Marvel's actually been shooting for a little while now because we've seen some set photos pop up online of Brie Larson in a surprisingly green and gray Captain Marvel suit. But today they made the official announcement that the principal photography has started, and with it came the official announcement of the full cast, which included some surprising additions that we had not yet heard about. The biggest one of them being Gregg returning as Agent Coulson, which makes perfect sense because since Captain Marvel is set in the 1990s, it exists in a time when Agent Coulson would still be alive and likely maybe even more of a junior agent, or maybe still Nick Fury's right-hand man. It remains to be seen. And in addition to that, we also have a couple of Guardians of the Galaxy cast members making a comeback, which also makes sense. One of them being Lee Pace as Ronan the Accuser, the villain from the original Guardians of the Galaxy, who is a Kree. And since the Kree do play a big part in Captain Marvel's origin and her ongoing story, that's makes sense for him to come back. And then also Jaimin Hansu will be back as Korath the Pursuer, who was one of the people who was going after the orb that contained the Infinity Stone, the purple Infinity Stone from the original Guardians of the Galaxy as well. So it remains to be seen how they'll tie into the story and what that will involve, but it is kind of cool to see this cosmic side of the Marvel Universe tying together with this new edition of Captain Marvel.
Chris,
I do want to say
ahead.
though, spoiler alert for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Agent Coulson still is alive. He just is in a show that no one watches and no one really cares about, except for me and like 10 other people, I guess.
Yeah, we actually we just don't talk about it. I would still like to see someday that the Avengers find out that Coulson has been alive this whole time, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, probably not. He's already, I think in the show they're displaced in time anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, they found a workaround in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for that then?
Well, I think the whole show is a workaround in general. I mean, I will say it's still an enjoyable show for the most part, but I am excited to see Agent Coulson back in a supporting role character because I think that's where he really shines.
Chris, do you have any thoughts about the return of Gregg or the return of these Guardians characters to the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
No, not really. I mean, I'm looking forward to this one just because I don't know. It's even though these characters are returning, this seems like a different sort of direction for Marvel. I mean, for one thing, it's going backwards in time, so that alone has me intrigued. And I'm also a big Ben Mendelsohn fan, so he's in this, so that alone guarantees I'm going to see it.
Mm-hmm. Brad, really quickly before we move on to our next topic, I know that the Time Stone is going to factor into Avengers Infinity War, and with this movie going back in time, but maybe Avengers and Avengers 4 coming up, do you think there's a chance that somehow some other characters in those movies get cast either backwards or forwards in time? Like, do you think this might be a way for them to bring Coulson back in, from the past to the future beyond the point where he was already dead? Do you think that's something that they could do?
Oh my God! I mean, I hadn't really thought about that, but I mean that would be interesting if they were able to bring Coulson back in that way, especially if the Coulson that is still alive in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of exists outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a way that they could bring him back. I don't know. I feel like that might be too complicated and too weird for people to accept, but that would be interesting.
All right. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Captain Marvel, I think, opens in, March of 2019? Like just under a year from now? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. So let's move on to our next item, and that is Stranger Things Season 3. We have now learned a few new details about that show. Chris, what do we know?
Yeah, the biggest reveal, although it's not that shocking, is that the show will be set in this next season will be set in 1985, and every season so far has jumped forward a year. Season 1 was 83, season 2 was 84. Now this is 85. As I put it out in my write-up, it's going to be set in summer of 85, and summer of 85 is when both Back to the Future and The Goonies both came out, so I wouldn't be surprised if those get referenced in some way, because the show is very into that nostalgia, that 80s nostalgia. Beyond that, we know that there's going to be more Steve, Joe Keery's character, who had a lot more to do last season, so they seem to realize everyone wants more of him, so he's going to be in season 3 a lot more. And there's going to be more relationships between the kids. 11 and Mike, and Lucas and Max are going to continue. Season 2 ended with them sort of, all those characters coming together as couples, so to speak. And so they're going to get more of that in season 3.
HT, are you caught up with Stranger Things?
I am. I'm very excited for more Dad Steve.
I was going to specifically throw that to you because that just seems like something you would be super into.
It sounds like something I'm into, right? And I am. He was so great in the second season of Stranger Things, especially kind of taking on that surrogate babysitter role of all the kids. And actually, speaking of the Goonies, I kind of felt that vibe towards the end of season 2. When Steve was kind of looking over all the other kids and they all came together in a big group. So I would be happy to see more sort of Goonies-esque adventures going on where stakes are a little less high and things can be a little more goofy, and Will maybe doesn't have to suffer quite so much.
Yeah, that would be nice. I think on a previous episode of the show, Chris and Peter and I did like an in-depth Stranger Things season 2 I guess like a quasi review where we just talked about a ton of different aspects of that show. Brad, are you caught up with Stranger Things? What did you think about the second season?
Yeah, I really like the second season. I wasn't even down as much on the sort of the spin-off episode, if you will, where we learn more about Eleven's quote unquote sister and the idea of other people with powers. I didn't hate that episode, but yeah, I really like Stranger Things season 2. I'm interested to see what happens with season 3. Also, since it's set in 1985, I'm sure that just like there were Ghostbusters references in season 2, we'll get plenty of Back to the Future references for season 3.
Yep, looking forward to it. Hopefully they can improve a little bit, because I loved the first season and thought the second season took a little bit of a nosedive, but it's certainly not unwatchable or anything. But I'm hoping they sort of pull out of that tailspin, or at least what I perceive to be a little bit of a tailspin there. Let's move on to another Netflix property, and that is a live-action Carmen Sandiego movie. HT, who's going to star in this thing?
Gina Rodriguez is going to put the Miss in misdemeanor as Carmen Sandiego in the Netflix live-action adaptation of the popular 90s computer game series / TV animation series / educational property. And so this will be her next sort of step in her budding movie career after she was a breakout hit in Annihilation. And this is kind of coming off the tails of her CW show, Jane the Virgin, soon ending. So this is a really exciting step for Gina Rodriguez, who will be starring as Carmen Sandiego and producing the Netflix adaptation as well. And this also comes after another little detail is she was voicing Carmen Sandiego for a animated series of the property for Netflix, which is coming out in 2019, and that's a 20-episode series. And I guess that Netflix liked her so much that they decided that they wanted to see her in the live-action version.
That's really cool. I'm sure this happened. It must have happened before, where somebody started out in animation and then jumped into live action. Maybe that happened in like Star Wars Rebels or something. Was Forrest Whitaker's character? Brad, did you watch Star Wars Rebels? Was that character?
I think he only appeared in Rebels after
Rogue
One.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Although I will say there is another CW show, Vixen, which started off as a CW Seed animated series. The actress who played Vixen jumped over to Legends of Tomorrow as a live-action version of that character.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. So if anybody else has any other options or instances rather of that happening, let me know, because I'm curious. Email us at peter@slashfilm.com.
There is also a Constantine animated series on CWC now that has the character voiced by Matt Ryan, who played the live-action version in the canceled NBC show, which the character has now been revived and is appearing in the Arrowverse series, and will be a series regular on DC's Legends of Tomorrow next season.
See, this is why I have you guys on the show. You know your shit. All right, so really quickly before we move on, I'm curious as to what y'all's relationship is with Carmen Sandiego. Did you grow up? I grew up playing the computer game in like computer lab classes, and when I was in elementary school and stuff like that. I never really watched the animated series, or if I did, it was pretty infrequently, but I remember the theme song because it's so iconic. Let's go around the circle, I guess. Chris, did you have any relationship with the Carmen Sandiego franchise when you were younger?
I do remember what was it? It was like a game show, was it? Or was some sort of like trivia sort of show. I remember watching that.
It was like a PBS educational geography show that had animated segments.
Right. I do remember that. I do remember they had it was like Rockapella was the house band that was always there singing. I do remember that, but I don't really remember like the detail. I do remember like they never really showed Carmen Sandiego, so it's kind of weird that I guess the movie is changing that where she's the main character, because the whole point of the show was they were constantly chasing her and they never could find her. So I guess the movie isn't staying true to the source material.
Yeah, you would think that maybe Gina Rodriguez would be playing like a detective who's hot on her trail or something, that the movie could follow that character. But yeah, it seems like it's going to be from Carmen Sandiego's point of view. That's sort of an interesting twist. HT, what about you?
Oh yeah, I grew up playing the computer game, and I also grew up on PBS, so because I didn't have cable as a kid, so I watched a lot of the game show as well. But yeah, I remember playing the computer game a lot as a kid and being extremely frustrated because you never catch her, and I really hated that game because I didn't realize that the point was to learn about geography and not to catch this lady who you missed just by a tiny sliver. It was very frustrating for me, but I remember liking Carmen Sandiego a lot, except for the fact you never catch her.
Yeah. What about you, Brad?
Yeah, I watched the game show whenever it was on PBS as well, and I have never forgotten the Rockapella theme song that they did for the show. Not to mention during the final game when you had to find like the loot and the warrant, and every time you did, they had Rockapella go the warrant and stuff like that.
Wow. All right. That's a deep cut. All right. So let's talk about one more Netflix-related item, and that is Netflix films are now officially banned from the Cannes Film Festival. HT, what do we know about this?
Yeah, so this is sort of the capper on top of the feud that started last year between the Cannes Film Festival and Netflix. So last year, Okja and the Meyerowitz stories were both allowed to screen for Cannes competition last year, despite only screening for day-to-date releases in both theaters and streaming. And this sort of flouted French laws for having a 36-month delay between the movie's theatrical release and its streaming release. And it caused quite a controversy when these movies screened in Cannes, so much so that Okja got booed as soon as the Netflix logo appeared on screen. But the movies themselves actually were critically praised, but it created such a stir that Cannes has gone out and just straight out banned Netflix from competing. So Netflix cannot submit films for future competition lineups, but they can screen them outside of competition.
So, HT, I saw that you tweeted, "This is dumb." The words, "this is dumb." Tell me why you think this is dumb.
Well, it's ridiculous because they are banning films just because of this distribution method. And I think that sometimes Netflix takes its disruptor status a little bit too seriously and, doesn't play by the rules. But at the same time, France is being incredibly just archaic in their approach to this, and it's funny to me that the head of the festival keeps saying things like, "We're a risk-prone festival. We like to take risks on our films," but here it's the complete opposite. They're sticking by a very traditional theatrical release method that doesn't, it only closes off these films to the rest of the world even more. And I think that just because Netflix does not really abide by theatrical release except for when they show for awards recognition or some sort of things. Like for the Oscars, you're required to have a 2-week theatrical run. That's often the case you see for a lot of indie films too. Like they don't even screen in theaters for that long either. So it's ridiculous to me that this is where Cannes is sort of drawing the line, because Netflix has a lot of great films like Okja, like the Meyerowitz stories, like Mudbound last year. So it just seems to me like a very backwards sort of reaction to Netflix and its changing of the model.
Chris, as somebody who attends a lot of film festivals, I assume you have an opinion on this. What do you think?
I mean, everything HT just said is pretty much is spot on. It's a silly, archaic way of approaching, the future, and to take you way back in time, back in when talkies were coming in. Not that I remember this personally, I'm not that old, but back when when talkies were taken over for silent films, there was this sort of same reaction from industry people who were just like, oh, they're gonna ruin movies. This is a bad idea, and it became the norm, and it's people clinging onto this idea that if something isn't directly made for the screen, it can't be a real movie, and that it doesn't apply anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of terrible Netflix movies, and they're poorly made and all that stuff, but there's also really great stuff. I mean, Okja was in my top 10 best movies of the year last year. I think it was phenomenal. So I just feel like it's time for people to start adapting to the future, whether they like it or not.
I also saw an argument talking about how Netflix, its strategy right now is just more content, and how these films, this is an article I think I saw on Screen Crush, arguing that these films are made to be watched sort of in the background and not being sought out from Netflix for its quality or anything. But I think that regular studios put out just as much trash as Netflix does, but they have an equal amount of movies that go to festivals or that get in award circles and that kind of thing. So I think that Netflix being singled out for this reason is just ridiculous.
Brad, do you agree, or do you sort of see where Ken is coming from here?
No. Cannes being really pompous and just not cool about this. They're definitely, they've always been the most stuffy film festival. And I just feel like this is just them trying to separate themselves, even from things like, Sundance and TIFF, and they're just trying to keep the, the upscale flair that they have because it's France and whatever, and like it just goes along with the thing of like now some of the other rules that were brought about is that now they're going to try and ban selfies on the red carpet, and they were trying to stop people from wearing flats, around Cannes before, and it's like, chill out, guys. It's like it's a film festival. Grow up.
All right. So let's move on to. I have no way of transitioning smoothly from that into the next thing. So let's just dive into A Galaxy Far, Far Away. Some new details behind Solo, a Star Wars story. The reshoots of that movie have surfaced. Chris, what do we know about that?
Yes. So an anonymous source. This is apparently an actor on the film. Spoke to Vulture, and he or she gave away some details about, the infamous behind the scenes goings on with Solo, where, Lord and Miller were fired and Ron Howard was brought in to finish. I won't go through everything. You can read it on /film.com, but basically what this source says is Disney was not happy because Lord and Miller were doing up to 30 takes of one scene, whereas Ron Howard came in and got the same scene done in 1 or 2 takes. I just want to add a caveat here that doesn't really mean Lord and Miller are bad filmmakers. It just means their approach to filmmaking is not what Disney wants. Disney, they want these movies done in a timely fashion. They want them done exactly this sort of specific way so they can get them out and meet a deadline and make a lot of money. And there's nothing wrong with that, but
right, because David Fincher, I think he famously did like 99 takes of the scene, the opening scene of The Social Network, right? And I don't think people would really say that David Fincher is a bad director because he does that. It's just a different tactic.
Right, exactly. And Stanley Kubrick, same thing. He used to do hundreds of takes, and that's just a very different approach to filmmaking. Some other stuff they talk about, for one thing, the script stayed exactly the same, which was something I was wondering about. I was wondering if when Ron Howard came in, they were going to change the script up, but apparently he's using the exact same script that Lord and Miller were. There's also some stuff about I can never pronounce his name. Alden
Ehrenreich, I think.
Sure, that sounds right. Alden Ehrenreich. There was a rumor that an acting coach was brought in, and this source confirms that and says that the acting coach helped. This source also throws a little shade on Alden by saying he's not a bad actor, he's just not good enough, which is a little brutal, but I guess that's this person's opinion. So, you can get more details at the article at slashfilm.com.
That sounds like some jealousy to me. I wonder if this quote-unquote actor who spoke with Vulture and divulged all these details is actually just like a background extra or something, and they're calling themselves an actor. I don't know. Who knows where all of that stuff comes from. But Brad, I'm interested to hear what you think about this, especially the idea that they used the same script to film. Did that surprise you as well?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would. I guess so. Like, I would have assumed that maybe there would have been some changes because with Lord and Miller working on it, there's probably a little bit more of a loose feel with some of that dialogue, even though they have a strict story they have to stick to. But at the same time, it's the improvisation doesn't really do much to change the script overall. Just it adds some jokes and different readings on lines and things like that. So I think what it comes down to is really what we get from it is that Lord and Miller were used to shooting much more fast and loose and weren't really prepared for something of this scale and delivering, something on par with, what Star Wars is supposed to be. And they needed a director that could really reel things in, get the shots that they knew they needed to get and not spend as much time, trying to goof around and figure out what works best. They need somebody who knows, what works best. And yeah, to really hunker down and get the film done the proper way, I guess.
Mm-hmm. There's one more Star Wars item on our docket today, and that is that Mark Hamill has revealed the original ending of Star Wars Episode 9 as intended by George Lucas. So we're never actually going to see this version of the movie, but Hamill has explained what the sort of in broad strokes what that ending was going to be. Chris, what did he say about that?
Yeah, so before George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, he had a rough idea of, a new trilogy and what he wanted to do with them. And Disney kept a few of those ideas, but they mostly threw George Lucas's ideas in the rubbish bin. And Mark Hamill is saying one of those ideas was to end Episode 9 with Luke training Leia, I guess, to be a Jedi, and then Luke dies. I mean, obviously, even if Luke hadn't died in The Last Jedi, spoiler alert, even if that hadn't happened, obviously that couldn't, this ending couldn't have happened anyway, because Carrie Fisher, of course, passed away before Last Jedi came out. But this is just one idea that could have happened, but now never will.
HT, what are your thoughts about this original trilogy ending as envisioned by George Lucas?
I think it's fascinating, and I definitely like the idea of giving Leia a bigger role just because we see so many hints of her being Force sensitive in the first trilogy, so it would have been really great if they followed up on that. But yeah, I don't see this ever actually occurring in real life, although I think Brad pointed this out in the Slack chat. I would really like to see a novelization or something, or maybe like a behind-the-scenes book of what the original story entailed.
Yeah, Brad, did you have any other thoughts about this?
Yeah, I feel like now that we're at a point where once we finish this new trilogy, we're supposed to be finished with the Skywalker saga, because all of the other two Star Wars movie series that are coming out after this will not be part of it. They'll take place in a different time period in the Star Wars galaxy. So I wish that they would release some kind of book that collects what the ideas that George Lucas had written down, even if it's just his like scratch notes, a treatment, whatever he had. Just publish it so that fans can see, what his ideas would have been and how different that would have been. I think that would be really cool just to get an idea of what that would have been like.
Yeah, and I want somebody to make like a Jodorowsky's Dune level documentary about what George Lucas's vision of the sequel trilogy would have been, because I feel like there's probably enough material out there. Not that we have access to it, but it's in a vault somewhere, that if somebody were able to get access to that stuff, I feel like there's probably storyboards, there's probably treatments, there's probably all sorts of stuff where you could make sort of, in the vein of that movie, sort of animate the storyboards and do a cool sort of retelling and be able to let George Lucas's vision be seen, and fans can sort of compare it to the real version that we get. But I don't know. I don't know if that'll ever happen. We'll see if Disney decides that that they're going to bestow that upon the world. But all right. So the last thing is Pacific Rim Uprising, and last week on Friday's episode of the show, we did a whole episode devoted to that movie where I spliced in interviews with John Boyega and Stephen S. DeKnight, the writer-director. So if you have not listened to that episode, I would recommend going back and checking that out. I guess earlier last week was talking about how I saw the movie and actually was not a big fan of it. But Brad, you have since seen the movie and you enjoyed it way more than me. So in the interest of fair play, I wanted to give you a little bit of a platform here to share your opinion that was different than mine and tell me why you liked Pacific Rim Uprising.
Yeah, for me, I just had a lot of fun with this movie. I don't think that it's really any. I don't see how it's worse than the first movie. You definitely feel that Guillermo del Toro isn't part of the franchise, but not in a bad way. It just feels slightly different because I think that it builds on the mythology of what's set up in the original movie in an interesting way because it's been 10 years since the events of the original. It's almost like it exists in this kind of a wacky sci-fi version of what like post 9/11 world would be. If you think about how we as a society advanced after 9/11, and there was a short period for mourning and somberness and fear, but now people have started to forget about this disaster that was in the past, and now it's kind of life as it used to be. But there's this sense of like global patriotism now because everyone has Jaegers and they're super advanced and they have cool weapons and they're really not like necessarily worried about Jaegers anymore or kaiju anymore, or at least most people aren't. And so they've taken to using old Jaeger tech and turning it into weapons and things like that. People are building their own custom Jaegers, and so I think that it's this cool advancement of the world that was created in the original one. And on top of that, the action lends itself to being just big and fun and cool. It reminded me of a Saturday morning cartoon. Like, I've never been a fan of big mech fights or anime or things like that. But there's something about this that just felt really cool to me because unlike the first movie that is constantly just kaiju versus Jaeger, this mixes things up a bit, because we get an idea of the capability of what people can do with custom Jaegers. I don't want to spoil anything, but the rest of the action sequences change up the formula of just having a Jaegu versus kaiju. Again, I won't say specifically why. You can, if you really want to, you can dive into it in my spoiler review. But I think that it just takes what was set up in the original movie in some interesting directions. Not to mention the absolutely crazy twist that happens about halfway through the movie, and which really is kind of a turning point as to whether you're going to be on board with everything that happens after it or not. I just had a lot of fun with it. I think that it's wild, it's cool, and I just don't know how you can't have a good time watching this movie. And even though I will say Scott Eastwood is terrible in this movie, I think that John Boyega and Kaylee Spaney, however you pronounce her name, I'm sorry. I think that their chemistry together and the way that they work in this movie really saves it from being super campy. Campy in a bad way, because it still is campy because of the kind of movie it is, but it's campy in the same way the first movie was. And I just think that it ups the ante in different ways while still staying true to what made the original movie cool.
Well, that's Brad's thoughts on Pacific Rim Uprising. I disagree with so much of what you just said right there, but I'm just going to let it slide. And I know that there's one thing we all can agree on, even though HT and Chris have not seen Pacific Rim Uprising yet, and that is that Scott Eastwood is a terrible actor. So let's end on that for today. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deep dives into the great features that you can find at the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. And don't forget to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Be sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Rate and review the show on iTunes. That would be really awesome. And before we end, let's go around the circle and tell people where they can find more of our work online. Brad, let's start with you.
You can find me on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton, and you can also check out my own podcast called Go Flix Yourself, FLIX, on iTunes and other podcasting platforms.
HT?
You can find me on slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at HTranBuoy.
Chris?
Also slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Evangelista413.
You can find me at slashfilm.com as well, and you can find me on Twitter at Ben Pears. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.